I got my hands on the MPC KEY 61, which is a keyboard I have wanted to use for a very long time. And it's not just a keyboard, it is a full-blown MPC with a keyboard attached. It's right there. This was not sent from a KEY, it was sent by Zounds. They didn't ask for anything in return. They're just cool like that. I am stoked to use it more. I've only been using it for a day, but I've used MPCs for years at this point. I've used the MPC 1, the MPC Live 1, the MPC Live Mark II, and I think that's it. When the MPC KEY 61 was announced, it seemed like the perfect device for me. I do tend to use keys to play most of my music when I'm composing. So I compose MIDI loops, right? But I compose them with keys. And I've really enjoyed using the MPCs, and really starting with the Live Mark I, but especially the Live Mark II. And honestly, the MPC 1 might be still my favorite MPC just because of how many per function buttons it has. And we'll get into that because that is maybe the only real con for me of the MPC KEY is I'm kind of spoiled by how many buttons there were on the one, and they're not quite as many on the KEY 61. But that said, there are plenty. I'm going to talk a lot about this keyboard, so let's take a look. So the MPC KEY 61, this thing has 61 keys, as you might imagine, based on the name, and then a full-blown MPC inside of this device. It is essentially kind of a cross between a workstation keyboard and a DAW in a box. And to be frank, there are ways in which this is the most powerful standalone computer for music production I've ever used, especially if you're a keyboardist. It also is a pretty good value given how many plugins are included with it, depending on how you value the Akai plugins and what you think about the MPC workflow. I'm showing you the boot time in real time, just so you can get a sense of it. Personally, I'm not super offended by boot times, slow or long, but yeah, that one's really not too bad. There's a really good chance this might be semi-redundant, so if you know all of the specs, apologies. One of the big ones that kind of threw me off when they first announced this is that there's no SD card slot. So I did what some other YouTubers have done, and I just basically bought a $20 256 gig USB 3 thumb drive and copied over the SD card I had in the MPC 1, and you can see that right there. Additionally, this has those two XLR 1/4-inch combo jacks that the Akai Force has, which is awesome to see in an MPC, and those have phantom power. Although I generally use a dynamic mic when I'm recording with a DAW in a box, it's still cool to have the option. On the front here, we've got the magic touch strip thing. What do they call this? The touch effect strip? I can't remember. Comment below in the comments. Probably just a touch strip, but this was originally on the MPC like Beats controller. I forget what they call that, but it's like the 2.0 version of their software controller had this. You've got MPC 1 style drum pads, which I'm having difficulty actually getting the sensitivity to be quite right, to be frank. There are quite a few buttons, some of which map pretty well to useful functions. Please correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, but the one I feel like I missed the most is a save button. I don't think there's a save button on this, and I swear there was a save button on the MPC 1. This is a full-blown keyboard with aftertouch, monophonic aftertouch, so if you hold a chord and then push down, the same aftertouch value will apply to every note that's being played. Whereas something like the Native Instruments Control Mark III that I was talking about last week, that one has polyphonic aftertouch. Although it doesn't have a bunch of supported NKS plugins that actually use that yet, it is a little bit future-proof. I think polyphonic aftertouch and MPE are both really cool, kind of forward-looking MIDI options, but I don't think they're a dead requirement for a machine to be great or not. Oh yeah, and really briefly on the topic of the Control Mark III, in my video last week, I hilariously said that there were no cons because I somehow missed a presentation that explained that the Control Mark III doesn't work with Machine at all, which like, I knew it didn't have the buttons. Like I have eyes, I could see it didn't have the buttons, but I had pre-release software and like a really basic email and outline of what was there. And I didn't watch the presentation because it was during my work. I could have watched the recording though, so it is on me. But yeah, I totally said in a video that there's no cons of the Control Mark III because I somehow missed the fool I am. That it doesn't work with Machine at all. And I think Machine users have a right to be frustrated. The other thing that people talked about on the comments of that video, besides that I was a huge sellout, which, hey guys, maybe give me a little bit of benefit of the doubt, but whatever. The other thing they talked about was that they wanted a standalone version of the Control Mark III or some sort of Native Instruments keyboard. And that is kind of the thing that pushed me to really finally try the MPC KEY 61, because it's essentially the only real standalone keyboard all-in-one created by a company that traditionally or is primarily only doing like DAW in a box style devices. I know Roland does make the MC707 and also the Phantom line, so There's some crossover there, but when I think of Roland, I don't think of them as like a beat making DAW in a box type company first. I think of them as like a drum machine synthesizer company first, and then a DAW in a box company third or second. So when I talk about this keyboard, I will compare it a little bit to the Control Mark III, but it's worth noting that like the Control Mark III is a MIDI controller. This can serve as a MIDI controller for your other devices, but it is the most self-contained device I've ever used because I haven't used something like a Phantom or a Triton or the Nautilus or any of those standalone, even the Yamaha ones. I haven't used workstation keyboards before, but I have used a lot of MPCs and a lot of MIDI keyboards, and so it is cool to have all of those features in one device, especially with plugins I know pretty well and a workflow I know pretty well. I don't know if this is new, but you can set the start page to show project templates, demos, and your most recent projects, and I really like the most recent project option. I don't remember that before. If that's been there for a while, let me know in the comments. Yeah, I'm gonna click Guile. This is the first thing I made. And I spent a bunch of time on this last night, which might be embarrassing depending on what you think of the finished product. Not that it's really a finished song. It's more like a loop in progress with different variations, because that's how I tend to build out. But I will say in the hours I spent on this, I had a lot of fun kind of getting used to the workflow of this thing, specifically the layout of the Key 61, and then just getting to kind of enjoy what it's like to have a keyboard that's very clearly calibrated to the plugins that shipped with it. So I've always used the MPC plugins with different MIDI controllers, primarily the Complete Control Mark II. And so using this keyboard is fascinating because it really feels like the velocity sensitivity and aftertouch of the MPC plugins are really tuned for this exact keyboard, which is pretty neat. Something else I noticed was, at first I thought this was the only shift key. Again, I'm not an expert. I'm simply a person like you figuring out life one day at a time. But yeah, I thought that was the only shift key. And then I realized there's a shift key over here for these controls. And so it's pretty possible to one-hand shift every control on this device. And I find that to be pretty good design. If they can't have as many buttons as I would like, at least there is a way to multifunction with one hand on both sides. I'm not super impressed with the drum pads yet, especially compared to something like the Machine or the Ableton Push 3 or even the Force. But they're pretty good, and I think I just need to tune them a little, like just mess with the sensitivity. I'll show you the settings I have, because maybe I did this super wrong, and then in the comments you can roast me and tell me what I should have. So I have pad threshold at 3, and pad sensitivity at 15, and the curve at A. If this is dumb, please tell me what the right ones are if I don't want to like have to beat the crap out of my hands just to get a sound. I want like highly sensitive pads, if that makes sense, because my fingers are messed up and I'm literally in physical therapy for them, which kind of sucks actually, but that's its own story. So I've already talked your ear off about this thing. Let's hear what it sounds like. If you've heard an MPC before, then it sounds like an MPC. But I do feel like having this keyboard and having all these controls in one device does change how I create stuff, which is kind of cool. So I'll show you what I made, and then I'll kind of wrap up some of my first impressions and thoughts about this. Let's get the audio recorder going. Okay, yeah, I'll start with the intro sequence, and then I'll play the intro and the full version of this loop, and then I'll kind of walk through what I built and how I did it. So this one was really fun, and it was really just spending a bunch of time on one project to get a handle on how this thing works. And so if we go to track 1, this is Celeste, which is a Fabric XL plugin, or preset in the Fabric XL plugin. It's got a Celeste keyboard sound and a soft analog sound. And that was the first loop I played. So if I go to mix here, plugin 1, and solo it, Then I added some drums. And these are from a lo-fi expansion, which Akai did give me a code for, full disclosure. And then I added more drums. And these are actually from backyard jams from Native Instruments, which they also give me that. I know, I'm a huge sellout now. But anyway, very grateful for this. This is a badass bow bass, and that's by Bolts. They sampled the OP1, or sorry, the OPZ, and then made a bunch of MPC expansions, which you can buy on Bolt's website. Shout out to Bolt. I bought those, I believe. They may have been free, but I'm pretty sure I would even donate if it was free. This is the Jura, I believe. Unsoloed then. And you can hear some guitar. So I did actually record 2 tracks of guitar. You can see that in the audio section here. So track 1 is Chanel, and I named it and I saved a channel strip so that I could copy the channel strip over to track 2. This made it really easy to have the effects that I set up for the first guitar track on the second guitar track. And let's see if it'll let me solo track 1 and 2 here. Let's go to mix, audio tracks. They sound okay. I think that if I go to returns, no, it's not return, it's submixes. On submix 1, I added a Flavor Pro. And if I go to mix, does it show this? Yeah, so I have Air Flavor Pro going. This is what the guitar sounds like with their original effects, but without Flavor Pro. And with Flavor Pro. And I feel like that just made the overall mix sound more cohesive, especially because I also routed, if I go to audio tracks and route, you can see these are going to sub 1. If I go to programs, you can see that plugin 06 is also sub 1. Track 6 is, so this is Jura right here. Let's unsolo audio. So this is also going to that Flavor Pro. So what it sounds like without it. This is what it sounds like with it. Not super different, but I still thought it'd be interesting to kind of group it with the 2 guitars. Once you get a handle on this interface for going into the mixer and viewing everything as these little chunks instead of like strips the way they are on the Force and on a lot of DAWs, it's pretty easy to kind of get a handle on the workflow and figure out how one thing relates to another in a different DAW. I think the more different pieces of gear I learn, the more I'm able to kind of understand a lot of gear, because I stop thinking about things as where they are in one specific interface, and I start thinking about them as concepts, which can be really useful. But yeah, this was a lot of fun to make. And like I said, it's pretty simple, but I think it came out pretty cool. Definitely plenty of room for improvement, but it was a good little learning experience. If I go to browse places, one thing I will say is I always install all plugins, expansions, and everything else on the external drives on my MPCs. This lets you access them on the PC very easily. And it also just, I don't know, I think it's more stable or whatever. I'm not totally sure on that last part, but I've always done it. The other thing I made is this thing called Smarmy, and I don't know if it's any good, but this is the other thing I was working on. I think this was this morning. I think the piano didn't load immediately. Yeah, there we go. That snare is too loud. So if we go to mix and then pad mix, That's our snare. I'll add a delay to it. Change the mix to 30. Change the time to 1/4. Lower the feedback. Damp it a little. Increase the feedback in the mix. Lower the mix. Yeah, that sounds better. And I do love that there's per pad effects. I mean, that's not new on this, it's just new. Or not new. It's not new on the MPC keys, it's just a nice feature of MPCs in general. What's new on this one is just the amount of, oh, we don't want to go controller mode, is the amount of memory or RAM. So there's 4 gigs of RAM on this. The only other MPC with 4 gigs of RAM is the X Special Edition. And I was actually surprised the MPC 1 Plus did not get 4 gigs of RAM. This kind of tells me they're not expecting to make too many things that need RAM, or they're expecting to leave behind the MPC 1 Plus, which I don't think is true. I haven't heard anything about this. This is just me inferring. Okay, so some kind of final wrap-up thoughts on these first impressions. Because I have a history with the MPC, the Machine Plus, the Akai Force, and the Ableton Push 3 standalone, I feel pretty confident in kind of talking about where I think this stands compared to everything else. And to be honest, I think if you could only get one device, there's a strong argument for the MPC KEY 61. This is because it already has a built-in MIDI controller. It already has a huge suite of plugins. It has the ability to multi-auto sample, or at least auto sample, but that includes multi-sampling. You can basically turn any other instrument you might have into an instrument built into an MPC. This is not the only device that can do this. I'm just listing the features this one specifically has. It doesn't have a full arranger mode, so that would make it tricky to be your end-all be-all DAW destination, but it does have a full integration with the MPC software, which puts it above something like the Force. Although I love the Force is completely self-contained. It has an arranger, but you're kind of stuck in the box of the Force, which some people don't like. I've made multiple demos that I really like on MPCs, just building out sequences and then using the song mode in the menu settings to kind of chain the sequences together and then export that as a finished demo track. You can also export stems out. And so I am not fully DAW-less in that I don't release finished music that doesn't touch a DAW. Everything I make eventually ends up in Ableton as stems. I usually add additional layers in software, sometimes Ableton instruments or native instruments or Arturia, most of which I paid for myself. Some of the native instruments ones they've given me, which is cool, nice of them. The other thing this has that some of my commenters like Jeff will point out, or Hefe, can never, I don't know which one it is. Shout out to Hefe or Jeff. They've pointed out that the Akai devices, so this is all the MPCs and the Akai Force, they have a vocal suite on board, which makes it really easy to tune, harmonize, and just overall affect the human voice for singing in a really cool way. You heard the amp sims in one of my demos on here. They're not like the best amp simulator you'll ever hear, and I think that's probably the story of the Akai devices. They start at a very base spec. Like, these are relatively weak machines on a pure hardware power level. But because the software is perfectly optimized, or at least targeting specifically that hardware, I find that it takes really good advantage of the hardware and it doesn't feel like it overloads it. You heard the piano take a second to load in my second demo. That would be something I would like. I would prefer if the machine wouldn't start the loop until every plugin had loaded, but they load pretty fast on here, noticeably faster than on the other MPCs I've used, because this has 4 gigs of RAM, which is another pro for the 61. Honestly, I think it's pretty hard to go wrong with most standalone devices, and there's definitely a strong argument that you could get like a used MPC 1, the original, for like $400 or $500, and then just like a nice Novation, Arturia, Native Instruments mid-tier keyboard for like $100 or $200, and that would be a lot cheaper than this. It doesn't have all the same features, but it does have more buttons, the MPC 1. You could also get an MPC Live 2 used, probably for like $800, $700, maybe $900. And that has a speaker, which weirdly, I know this might sound dumb, but I actually kind of wish this thing had a speaker. Like, it has everything else, and so I wish I had a speaker. I mentioned I'm using a USB drive. That's partially for simplicity. This has 2 USB ports, and normally I wouldn't want to take a port away from one of my devices, but this already has a keyboard built in, which is usually what I use one of the USB-C ports, or one of the USB ports for on any of my devices. I'm trying to think of anything else. This does have a SATA bay, so if you want to put a SATA drive in, you can, which it'd probably be pretty cheap to do, but I was so surprised that this 256 gig USB 3 thumb drive was only $20. I mean, depending on how old you are, you know how crazy that is. I'm probably gonna make a lot more videos with this. Zound said I could keep it for as long as I want, which is awesome. Very grateful. Yeah, again, apologies on last week's video. I was gonna make like a follow-up video, but that seemed a little excessive, so I just put a pinned comment on that video. But I would never, ever purposely mislead you. I take the integrity and the trust that I have with you more seriously than anything else. This channel makes about $200 a month, most months, and I do get to borrow gear now, and sometimes I get free gear, which is cool, but to be honest, if I was gonna sell you out, I would need to make like $4 million. I'd need to make so much money I'd never have to work again for a day in my life and I could live off the dividends. And when that happens, I'm just gonna tell you if that happens. If someone offers me $4 million that I can live off 4% dividends for the rest of my life in exchange for me selling you out on this YouTube channel with 10,000 subscribers, or almost 10,000, thank you so much, by the way, I'll let you know. You'll be the first to know. But until then, please know that if I say something dumb, or if I say something that seems like, whoa, why would you say that? I probably just made a mistake or didn't know, because I'm just a person. I'm not purposely misleading you ever, I promise. I really do. The only tattoo I have says stay honest, and I got it when I was 20 or 21, and I think it's goofy now, and it's really good for working in corporate America, because it's like one of those tattoos that older people like. But yeah. I really am sorry that I did not do due diligence on that video, and I'm going to be more strict and careful about what I talk about when I talk about it and how, especially with pre-release devices. That's the first time I've ever had a pre-release device. And I just assumed that everything I needed to know would be in the emails, and it wasn't, and that's on me. And it's on me for saying something that wasn't true. So I am sorry about that. Thank you so much to everyone who supports this channel, who watches my videos, who cares about what I do. If you want to go above and beyond, I'd be so honored if you checked out my music. I have an album called There's Something Better, which I co-produced with my friend Jake Stein. We're working on my second album right now, and I'm really excited about it. And I want to give one final shout out to my Patreon patrons. I'm not going to list their names here because I have shut down the Patreon. I decided it just doesn't really make sense for the kind of channel that I have. I make plenty of money from my day job. I get gear from Zounds and Native Instruments and other companies, and I'm okay. Even if the channel has a bad month and only makes a couple hundred, like 200 a month, over the course of a year, it's enough to pay for gear upgrades, and I feel fulfilled and I feel good. Just you watching and caring about this means a lot to me. If you want to go above and beyond, really, I think listening to my music, sharing my music, or just telling people about my channel would be really cool. There's a super thanks button if you want, but I've only seen one person do it, and I'm still mind blown they did that. If you want to do that, that's cool too. But really, just the fact you care about what I'm making, what I do, it means so much. So thank you for listening to me ramble. I hope you have an awesome week ahead. I hope this was a helpful video. If you have anything you want to see me do with this, or want to see it interact with some of my other gear, I'm personally not interested in like, how does it work with the Force? Because to me, those are two different DAWs in a box. How does it work with the Machine Plus? Like, again, those are two different DAWs in a box. But if you want to see me like multi-sample or auto-sample the Mini Freak into here, or talk about some of my favorite key groups or that sort of thing, or ideas I haven't thought of, please consider putting them in the comments. And again, I just really appreciate you watching. I hope you have an awesome week ahead. And especially shout out to all the longtime subscribers who took the time to be Patreon patrons, such as like Derek Taylor, Cute Story, iPod My Pants, Sigmata. Just, yeah, I'm so moved, and I'm gonna stop talking because I'll never shut up if I don't. Okay, have an awesome week. Goodbye.